overseeing the major exploration programming within the A Center. A little background about myself. I've been in advising now for 12 years, working mostly, basically all of it's been with undeclared students. So I've seen kind of a plethora of difficult conversations over the years. And so, what are those difficult conversations I kind of see? I mean, it kind of runs the gambit, but I think the ones that I see probably the most usually are within students that are ineligible from the institution. That's a big one within the A Center. Students that need to pick a major and they've run out of classes, for example. I'm trying to
Alice
think.
has a similar
Oh,
experience.
I think we need a mute. And then definitely some of those difficult conversations, sometimes just you might not even be prepared for them as well, depending on when the student's coming in. So thinking about that, I will tell you this, I'll tell you a little bit more about difficult conversations that I get stuck with later, but why compassionate directness with this? And so I did a training with HR, actually had some series of trainings within LinkedIn this summer. And so one of them actually was compassionate directness. And so I did the training. I really enjoyed it. And I was just sitting there the entire time during training. What a nice model to actually use for some of those sticky conversations that we have to have with our students. And so it's just a really good model to think about ways to approach those conversations. So that's just a little bit about me. What are we going to be covering here today? So I kind of broken up today's workshop into 4 different areas. So first, you're like, okay, she said compassionate directness like 5 times now. What does she actually mean? We're going to define it. So we'll definitely do a definition there and talk about that. Then we're going to start talking about identifying some of those challenging scenarios. We'll do it as a group as a whole, but this is kind of a reflection time for you to think about where do you get a little stuck in some of those conversations. And then once we identify those, we're really going to do some practice with it. So applying that compassionate directness model. And then, as always, I always want to leave, some next steps there. What can you do after today's session to keep practicing this and kind of implement it into your advising practice? I will say this, I'm going to be calling a lot. I like making this interactive. So definitely have that chat button open because we're going to be using it throughout the presentation. But also, if you're really comfortable unmuting and want to talk, we've got time for that too. So lots of different stopping points through the session today to get you thinking as well. So let's define what this term means. What does compassionate directness mean? And where is it going to relate to academic advising? So we'll do a little bit of that in the definition. So to kick it off, where does this concept derive from? I probably should have put an asterisk here because it comes from the business world, which, I can't see your all's faces right now, but some of you might have some groans with that. That's totally fine. It was one when I first heard about it, I was like, oh, the business world. Ugh. So it does derive from the business world, but you'll see as we start defining it a little bit further, it's got a lot of translatable qualities that can fit into academic advising too. This is probably the most simplest direction or definition I found in a sentence. So, compassionate directness, or the ability to communicate honestly and openly while also showing empathy and understanding, is crucial to the quality to nurture within the workplace. So, what's kind of that underlying tenet? And so, really, where compassionate directness is coming from is that oftentimes we see compassionate and directness as opposing themes, opposing ways to approaching those conversations. And really, this framework is about using both within those conversations. And so it's just a little bit different way of having that conversation and trying to utilize the strengths of both of them. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more. So to kick it off that definition, I actually have a video. Again, it's the business world again, so a little bit different from our work. So you might go, does this all translate? But I actually think it gives a good definition. So I'm going to go ahead and play this so that you can get a little bit of concept, and then we'll talk about relaying it to academic advising a little bit more. Now, for this video, because it's, in that business concept, I want you to think about some of the things that you're hearing. And I think almost a majority of us in this room have probably worked with a student on academic probation, or maybe, not making progress in a major, something of the sort. Think of that student and think about some of the things you're hearing and those applications there. Okay, play it.
Embracing compassionate directness, the key to effective communication and relationship building. Brought to you by PM Student. Imagine if I had candidly approached an underperforming employee. He might have explained why he was struggling. My unclear expectations or his workload could have been the issue. Avoidance resulted in a mutual loss. As leaders, mastering the art of having difficult conversations with compassion and directness is essential. Should we directly address underperformance or indirectly hint through compliments to others, hoping the message is understood? Reflecting on my past, I avoided an employee who was underperforming. At his annual review, he was shocked by the low score and lack of raise, while I was frustrated he didn't realize his shortcomings. By avoiding tough discussions to protect myself, I inadvertently caused more suffering. This situation demanded compassionate directness and fierce self-compassion, crucial elements in addressing challenges effectively. Initially, avoiding difficult talk seems easier, but it leads to misunderstandings and negative consequences. Addressing issues openly fosters honest communication, preventing problems from escalating due to subtle hints or silence. Compassionate directness involves giving feedback and expressing concerns constructively. Balancing directness with empathy and understanding allows for respectful and kind conversations, a concept I learned from Arianna Huffington. Compassion and directness work together beautifully. Effective feedback considers the recipient's feelings, avoiding blunt truths. Embracing our beliefs, values, and emotions fosters an empathetic, supportive environment. Fierce self-compassion is vital in difficult discussions. Acknowledging our shortcomings with self-awareness enables us to engage in growth-focused conversations, preventing defensiveness and fear from escalating issues. Practicing compassionate directness enhances communication, creativity, and risk-taking. It strengthens personal relationships and reduces suffering, fostering a culture where feedback is constructive and promotes mutual growth. If I had been honest with my employee, he might have shared his challenges, revealing my unclear expectations or his excessive workload. My avoidance led us both to miss valuable insights. Today, I aim to approach such situations with compassionate directness and fierce self-compassion. This commitment helps me build stronger relationships and communicate more effectively, both personally and professionally. Ultimately, compassionate directness and self-compassion are transformative. They lead to open communication, personal growth, and a more understanding and supportive environment in all interactions.
All right, thanks for letting me indulge you with a video there. That's going to be the only video we watch today. But really, I thought it kind of summarized really well what you're thinking there. So the reason I had you think about the student on academic probation is oftentimes, even though we're going to derive this from the business world, we see similar type concepts. So a student on academic probation's kind of like an employee that might be struggling, right, and making that progress. And oftentimes they might not be all that aware, which some of you are probably sitting there nodding heads like, yeah, I've got a couple of those students I know of. So really kind of using this approach of, you'll notice they use the term avoidance in the video. So not necessarily avoiding it, but putting into that empathy while also being open. So what does that kind of look like? It's a lot of different words. So really some of those tenets that they have there is, you're going to notice these are 9 of these I put right here. So as you can see right here, communicating clearly, directly, listening actively, showing empathy, being respectful, giving and receiving transparent feedback, improving honest communication. Oops, I misspelled that one. And then, or miscapitalized that. Resolving conflict, achieving goals. I didn't. Developing trust. I was like, I can read my own slides. Any guesses? If anyone's willing to put in the chat, I realize it's lunchtime, so no worries if you don't get a guess. What are these blue underlined words right here? Anyone kind of actually know what that is? If anyone wants to unmute as well. Jimmy, I'm going to pick on you. Oh, let me move up my chat.
Values.
Nakata core values. Okay, perfect. Because Jessica just put Nakata core values. And then I think someone else, I think Marco, I heard you there. Someone put our values. So yeah, actually both perfect there. I derived it from the our U of A values that we came together as an advising community. but some of that comes from Nakata too. So this is perfect there. So yeah, some of these words that they use in within compassionate directness are some of the core tenets within our own profession. And so utilizing a lot of these different components can help with that. So that's just a little bit of the definition piece of compassionate directness. If any of you have gone through the effective communication with myself and Juliana Lincoln, we like doing a lot more practice approach. So it's good to have a little bit of theory, good to have a little background on it. But now, what does this mean for you as an advisor? And so we're going to talk about this ruler. So this is where we're going to start being a little more interactive. So I've got a ruler here. You're going to notice I didn't do this on purpose. I guess compassion 0. So probably should have done it the other end. And then directness over here is going to be a 10. And so take a moment, think about where when you are when you're in an academic advising session and you recognize you're having a difficult conversation. Think about where you're at with this. Do you resonate a little bit more with the compassion side? Do you resonate a little bit more with the direct side? Or do you find yourself somewhere in the middle? And so think of that number and go ahead and put it in the chat for me and get a chance. Seeing a lot of different numbers coming in. Good, good. Depending on the student, that's a good point there too. Good, good. I think we're seeing a range. I'm not seeing too many on like the 0 or the 10 side. Good. I'll give a couple more seconds here to see if anyone else wants to put your number. And if you don't want to share, that's totally fine too. So, with compassionate directness, the goal really is that you're able to use both of these, right? And so, this is why we're doing this ruler to see kind of where you within your own particular academic advising practice might kind of resonate towards. I think I maybe saw 1-5 in there, right? And so, really, compassionate directness is trying to aim a little bit more for that middle area there and also being self-compassionate and understanding where things might be more difficult for you. So if I were to say myself where I probably be on the ladder or the ruler, I'd probably put myself 3 to 4 as well. So I'm very self-aware that directness isn't necessarily my strong suit when it comes to advising. And so being able to recognize where some of those areas for growth are going to be really important in using this. And I want to note that some of you there put like depending on situation. Absolutely. And it really does depend there. And we're going to talk a little bit about limitations as well with this framework and where you kind of have to have some wiggle room there too. Thank you all for participating in that. So let's talk now about challenging scenarios because I think it's important that we define the ones that we find difficult in our own academic advising so that we can use this framework a little bit more. So to kick it off, I couldn't be leading this session without admitting that I don't have my own areas as well. So I wanted to kind of like show you just a little bit of an example from my end where I know I might struggle a little bit more and why. And this goes into the student scenarios, right? And so something to think about that too is depending on the student scenario. So for example, in the ACE Center, we work with students that are required program changers. If you haven't heard of that term before, these are students that are moved from colleges that they are not making progress in within their particular major, and they're moved over to the ACE Center to find a new major. So oftentimes I struggle in this area. Sometimes, and this is kind of funny that I put do or did right here. I've changed over the years too. So I used to be probably a little bit too compassionate in talking to these students and wouldn't be direct enough. They needed to find a new major and they need to move on from that particular major. We have a lot of students. I know I've got some in the room here too. They're probably going to laugh at this, but we have some students that just will never say no to a major. And so, oftentimes I'd be like, well, if we did this, this, and that, and I wasn't very direct with the student that, hey, you were moved out into your major for a particular reason. Let's talk about that and how to move forward. So I lacked a little bit of directness there. Academically ineligible. This is probably the flip side. When I first started in as an advisor, I'd really jump into that right away when they were either that or if you've been here at the U of A for a while, disqualified was the other term we used. Sometimes I'd be too direct with those students and not acknowledge that they needed some type of compassion within that moment too. Or the compassionate aspect is maybe having that conversation later. So that's one where I probably went a little bit more towards directness because I wanted to make sure to follow the policy and oftentimes wouldn't put the compassion in there. And then lastly, I just put non-receptive students. It's funny, when I first interviewed for my job, that was one of the students when I was asked what troubles you, that was one that went through the back of my mind is when I can't get a student to engage. And so sometimes difficult conversations are just when you can't even have the conversation yourself. And so sometimes I'm not direct in telling the student that we're maybe not having a effective conversation, inviting them back in. So sometimes that's some of my sticky areas. Like I said, some of the reasons I put do did is that these are areas that I've grown in, I've changed in. And so this is that type of framework that really you should check back with yourself because we all change as we go through the years with advising and working with students. Okay, I've been talking a lot. Let's talk about you now. So I want you to think real quick here. Where do you feel like your sticky points are, right, in difficult conversations? So I want you to take a moment to pause, reflect, and where you are finding difficulties in your advising appointments. What are those scenarios? And I know for some in the room, we definitely have some that are also in the advising management. So, if you want to think about different situations as well, that's totally fine. Whatever you're looking scenario wise to kind of improve in. So once you identify that, if you either want to add in the chat or unmute, I'm going to put a little bit of a timer on here. It's been a hot minute since I've been in Canvas. So I'm going to put a timer for about a minute and then we'll 2 minutes and then we'll circle back. I'm going to play some calming music during it. Think about those scenarios. Up in the chat, good. If you want to go ahead and start putting in the chat now, that's totally fine. Once the timer's done, I'll pause and see if anyone wants to unmute. All right, I'm gonna go. I am having issues with Canva. It looks like the screen got stuck. Speaking of sticky points, give me 1 second here. I might actually have to restart this. 2 seconds. I apologize, everyone. It for some reason was not working. All right. Let me get back to that slide real quick. Sorry about that. All right, fantastic. Sorry about that. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and get that chat back up. Cool. Let's go through it. Does anyone want to unmute and share any of their sticky points with the group? I'll pause for a second if anyone's willing to share. Totally fine if we're using the chat too. So I know that's been pretty active. Seen a lot, and definitely some that I've seen in advising as well. It's funny, Kat, seeing the not making the graduation in a specific semester. When we became the A Center and I knew I wasn't going to sign degree audits anymore, that was like one of the first things I was like, oh, I don't have to have that conversation anymore. So I don't miss that one. That one was a difficult one. But we're seeing a lot here, right? Where students maybe not are self-aware or lack the self-awareness that their classes aren't going well, or maybe just don't want to engage with a person, see that they're running out of solutions. I just actually ran into that yesterday with a student um, trying to find a major that was difficult too. STEM, struggling with the core foundation, seeing some upvotes there, not passing challenging class, used it up. Yep, plan B. Good. These are all fantastic. And I want you to keep these in mind, right? Because we're going to circle back to this and think about where you're at in the ruler and maybe taking this approach of how you can maybe handle some of these approaches a little bit differently. So thank you for doing that. We're going to go ahead and move on here. Keep these in mind because we're going to circle back to them a little bit later. Okay. So, one of the things you might have heard in the video is that really a huge component of compassionate directness is incorporating that concept of self-compassion. I think in higher ed, we've done this quite a bit, right? You've heard this concept probably defined a little bit in different ways, but really within this framework, it's about practicing a little bit of being, well, I'm not going to answer my question here, but it's really practicing that self-compassion. I don't want to define it because I actually want to see what that looks like for you all. So we're going to go back to the chat here. Go ahead, take a moment and think of that concept of self-compassion. What would that mean for you? So take a moment there and think about that. What does that look like for you? All right. Place myself student shoes, trying to understand their struggle from their perspective. Fantastic way. Practicing that empathy. Fantastic. What else? Wait for a couple more responses here and then we'll move on.
Trying to think about how to put it into words, but this is relatable to like, you know, interacting with students and also your relationships also, right? But also, so just like being able to facilitate the conversation in a way where you can like stand up for yourself and speak your truth, but in a way that's relatable to the other person so that they can be receptive to that and you can have a constructive conversation about whatever you're trying to like, whatever point you're trying to get to.
That's a really good point, Jimmy. And one of the things that I think was kind of touched upon in the video, but not very well about like you're present in these conversations too, right? And so that's important for you to acknowledge yourself and that truth there too. I think it's one of those concepts, if you think back to the video too, of knowing your own faults where you struggle with, I think can be really helpful when you're faced with these hard conversations. So thank you, Jimmy. I know a couple more have come in learning and understanding absolutely and definitely that growth mindset I think is really good there too. Understanding perfectionism is counterproductive, absolutely. Please, yeah, not assuming any type of assumptions I think are good. Yeah, I think these are all really, really good concepts here. Self-compassion is going to look different for us. The other thing that I think of with self-compassion is also a bit of self-care, I think, is in it too, and being an acknowledgement of when you need that particular self-care. We're going to touch on this a little bit further too as we start doing these scenarios, but I definitely want to take some time with this to get you thinking about that too, so that you can placate yourself in these conversations. Definitely again, this is coming from the business world, right? So I think we do a better job of this in higher ed, and we've done a good job promoting it, but still needs to be part of the conversation of this framework. So let's actually practice. Oh, hold on. I jumped ahead one slide. So I was like, I knew where I was, but didn't know exactly where I was. So these are the three areas that they defined within the framework of ways to address strategies. So one is that self-awareness, which a lot of you already touched in the chat, right? And thinking of that component. So we've started this process now, which is really important. Having a quick check-in with yourself, but also others, right? I think is super important there too. I know we all have different practices where, I'm in an office, I can hear them right outside now. They're getting our Thanksgiving lunch set up. So I have that kind of component there, but I know not all of you have that built in within maybe your office structure. So finding a way to also lean on others in that process. Reflection, I think some of you put reflection in there too. So that really is a big component there, that we're human in the process too. Growth mindset is really important there too. And then lastly, feedback. One of the things that we often don't get in advising, right, because it's just you and the student oftentimes, is feedback. This is probably one of those areas that we don't cover the most. And so feedback's a really great way, really interesting one to actually try to incorporate this with your student, maybe having that conversation afterwards about, we covered a difficult topic today. Is there any other way that I can assist you, right? Or that you expect it out of me, so that you can have that more open and transparent conversation with the student, but also that gives them the opportunity to think about what they might need from you in the future when it comes to these difficult conversations. But that's easier said than done. I'm just going to encourage you all to try it. But certainly, you're probably not going to sit in every advising appointment and be like, hey, tell me how I did, right? So, another great way is using that reflection piece, but actually talking to your peers, your supervisors, your mentors, and say, hey, I had this situation. This is how I handled it. Do you have any feedback for me? So instead of maybe, just trying to get someone to listen to what happened, maybe taking it that step further and thinking about that feedback. So the next time you have that conversation, it'll go a little bit better. Okay, so we're going to try to apply these strategies a little bit more into practice. And so here are some strategies I want you to keep in mind. We have 4 scenarios we're going to practice with. So first, being direct in the beginning. I kind of had a little hypothesis when we did that ruler that I was probably going to see more advisors on the compassionate side than the direct. Not saying either of those sides are bad or incorrect or anything of the sort. I think it's just a little nature of our profession that you probably see a little bit more on the compassion side. But with compassionate directness, they recommend that you be that direct up front. So it's more about not necessarily like saying, hey, you've been kicked out of U of A. What are you going to do about it? Right. And we'll look at an academic and eligible student, but it's more about saving the space that you're going to have a difficult conversation. And so thinking about it a little bit more in that lens. Make sure you have your points. I know this depends on the type of scenario we have, right? Certainly if they made an advising appointment in advance, you got a little bit of advantage there. We're going to do one scenario where it is a drop-in, so it requires you to be a little bit different there. So this is really making sure that you on your end are able to touch on those points that you really needed to drive home with the student. Being ready with solutions, again, that's going to be depending on the area. And then offering to have that conversation should always be a part of that solution there. And then again, saving space for that feedback if you can, right? That's probably one of our more difficult areas to practice there. Again, both you and the student. So something to think about there too. All right, let's dive into these scenarios. I want you to keep 4 things in mind as well in terms of like your own thoughts. Remember your ruler number when you're thinking about this in areas you want to improve. 2, there are no right answers or no ideal answers. 3, the power of no in compassionate directness. When I do advising training, this is probably the area I talk about of that. Oftentimes I think in advising, we're a little scared away from using the term no in advising. I like to say we're like a Google Maps or something. We never want to say no. We want to give them all these pass. But sometimes no is a powerful component in this. And then I want you to consider limitations because sometimes within compassionate directness, there are limitations. And so we'll keep those in mind too. Okay, enough of me talking. Let's do a couple scenarios. I'm going to again put on some nice calm music as we do this. So I'm going to read this out loud real quick, and then we'll do about another 2 minutes to think on it a little bit more. So scenario one, yes, I did cheesy famous people for these, so sorry about that. I was like, who am I going to pick? So due to priority registration, you are holding drop-in advising for your students. You look at your next drop-in, Tom Hanks, and you notice that Tom has a 47 units to be, failed a 7-week one class, and is on academic probation. Tom put in Trellis that he just wants to talk classes next semester. Using the being direct in the beginning strategy, so we're going to use this one first, of compassionate directness. How do you start this drop-in? So I'm going to put a little timer there to get us thinking about it first. Let's hope I don't crash Canva again. So think about that. Yeah, Serena, sorry.
I'm ready. I can wait.
Okay, sounds good. You're first up. I'll do 1 minute just for people to think about it, maybe jot some down some notes. Oh, and I promise music. If you want to just put in the chat, feel free to do it whenever you're ready. Do some unmuting. Okay, if you are starting to think of some solutions as we're talking, go ahead and put them in the chat. Serena, what are some of your thoughts?
So I've had this happen to me and with some students, and what I'll do when they do this is I'll like check in with them and let them know I saw you want to talk about classes, but we do have a more pressing. We do have to talk about academic eligibility before we can start planning for what's going to come next. And usually when I say that, like that helps them and they're like, okay, I know we have to do this. And especially like seeing this, if it's somebody that I've been working with, we kind of know what's coming. So then it's just planning and what the student's going to do and looking at all of our options. But when I do that, I like the students are more receptive and be like, okay, like they have the goal of like, if I want to talk about this, we got to cross this bridge first.
Yeah, that's kind of addressing like we're putting the horse or what's the cart before the horse, right? So thank you. Did anyone else want to unmute? I know I got a couple in the chat here too. This one's always a difficult one. I wanted to kick it off with a drop-in, right? Because this is where you're not prepared and thinking those tenets of compassionate directness. It's forcing you to have that conversation right away. I'm seeing some really good ones there, and all of these strategies are good, right? All of you are at least addressing in that component that yes, you have to have that conversation, but some different strategies on how you want to interweave that compassionate aspect to it too. So I think the reason I pick on this scenario is that sometimes we get busy, right? And sometimes you've got that line of students outside. So sometimes there's that component, and I'm sure I've done this before, where it's like, I don't even know if I have the time to address this, right? And so I really wanted to point that out too, if some of you were thinking about that, is that that is where the argument is the avoidance, right? And sometimes the avoidance, going back to that self-compassion, right, is just because you're busy and a little overwhelmed, but you might end up seeing some repercussions of that later down the road when you have that student come back in and grades have been in, right? Or maybe a withdrawal date has passed and now they haven't reached it. And so that's this really encouragement with compassionate directness is saving that space up front to have that conversation and a little bit of redirect that I was hearing from you all too. So perfect. Thank you for that one. We're going to move on to scenario two. Okay, so you've been working with Priyanka Chopra for 3 years now. Priyanka has struggled in maintaining progress with major courses. I know some of you put graduation in here and is not on track for four-year graduation path at this point. You notice Priyanka has applied for graduation due to credits and made an appointment to do a graduation check. Using the making sure you have your points strategies of compassionate directness, what's some ways you can at least prepare for a meeting like this? I'll go ahead. I'm going to put the timer on for a minute again so that you can think over this. Again, remember your ruler, right? A lot of you probably have already identified this area. So if you're like, well, I've had this before, think of the ways you'd want to improve as well as you're thinking of this scenario. All right. Elevator music real. All right, we're at time. So think of some of those thoughts you were having. Anyone feeling brave and I want to unmute for this one by chance? Totally fine if not. I'll wait for the chat. It's lunchtime, so I don't want to force you to talk if you don't want to. Any thoughts on this one? Yeah, go ahead.
So for this one, I would definitely like, once again, I think we would have a conversation prior to this, but I would definitely like in the meeting, I always like to run through like, hey, these are the items I want to cover. And I usually tell my students like, what do you have on our to-do list for today? And there's going to be some overlap there, similar to what we did. What I mentioned in the first one is I said, I noticed we're going to talk about graduation, but I do want to like, we actually have to talk about what that plan's going to look like and timeline. Um, and just like also hearing the student out because like I know for a lot of our students, like then it's also potentially a financial change and just starting to think about other things on how are they going to finance, like, well, worry about classes, but then also thinking about the financial piece to it.
A really good kind of interweaving of compassion in there. Good. And again, setting that framework, which is really important there too. I love the infusing as like, I'm excited to see you graduate. I love that across the finish line and starting from that component and that pathway to graduation. Good. Any other thoughts on this one? So I'm going to talk from my perspective when I used to sign off on degree audits. I think this is where I want you thinking about limitations too. I used to come in and prepare for so many different solutions, right? And oftentimes I probably over prepared for a situation like this and psyched myself out in the process. And so that's where some of that self-compassion goes in that you can't over prepare. And that's something to think about there too, is that when you're facing these difficult scenarios and you've got a little bit of time ahead to plan for it, that you're also making sure that you're, being okay with that conversation. I remember when I was a new advisor, I probably lost some sleep over not knowing I had that coming up. So, definitely, I want to say there is a limitation there that I don't want everyone to see this as like, oh, okay, part of compassionate directness is just making sure I'm a bit more prepared. Yes, but we already kind of do that, right? So I would recommend the approach of, you know what, taking care of yourself a little bit more as well is super important there. So, and oh, good, we got another one there. Yeah, addressing kind of like some the interweavings of why they're not graduating there too. But I think what's important here too is sometimes I would be so quick to say it doesn't look like graduation is going to happen this term. Let's talk solutions. And so some of these questions are really good there too, of saving that space again that that's maybe the first time the student's hearing like, I'm not actually graduating. So letting them kind of grieve a little bit within the appointment, because that might be that bad no news there too that they need. So cool. Let's go on to scenario three. Again, I'm going to give a little bit of a minute here for you to think. So Pedro Pascal, if any of you are going to go see Gladiator 2, made an advising appointment to discuss English 102 class. He reveals at the beginning of the appointment that he was accused of using AI on an assignment. And I've started getting these appointments this semester. I'm sure some of you have gotten these too. So, which Pedro owned up to using? So, Pedro is now going to fail the class and he won't receive renewal for scholarship next year. His parents are furious. He won't be able to receive the scholarship anymore. Thinking of the be ready with solutions strategy as well for this one. Thinking about what are some of those solutions that you can prepare for and how maybe you'd want to address this situation. So go ahead. We're going to do another minute. I want you thinking about it. Again, think about that ruler of where you might be on that ruler and where's some area for growth there. Okay. How many of you have seen the AI conversation in your advising this semester? I definitely have. And actually, this is a reflection point that with the particular student I had to reflect afterwards if I was direct enough with the student. So just kind of a hint there where I struggled as an advisor. Okay, think about the moment here. If anyone wants to speak, welcome to. If not, let's give a moment to put some stuff in the chat.
I was going to say, I'm not an advisor, but I think one of the talking points that came to my head that I would want to, make sure that the student hears is that, that they're here to, learn and receive an education. And so, like, it's just really important for them to be cognizant of engaging in that learning and not selling themselves short by using AI to write their assignments for them. And even though it might be easy, save them some time. Like, when you're out of college, you're not just going to miss the fun partying time that you had, but you're probably going to miss like the classroom as well. And so, the professor might allude to that in the email that they sent to the student. Maybe their parents had that conversation, but besides that, the advisor might be the only one having that conversation with them about, hey, make sure you don't sell yourself short and engage in your learning in the best way you can.
Yes, Serena.
Yeah, this one's tough because like I know I had a student who was in a similar situation like last year, and the student like they owned up to what they did, but it was almost more like they were trying to like just sweep it under the rug as fast as possible. And like there was a lot of value in having the conversation with the student because the student wanted to like talk about, okay, what am I going to do next? But I was like, hey, let's take a moment and reflect on like why did this happen? Like how could this like potentially have a larger impact on you? And the student hadn't thought through. They thought like, oh, I'm just going to fail the course. But then we talked about academic integrity on campus, what that could mean on their transcript. And they were like, oh, I didn't realize that that could happen. So they appreciated me bringing that to them instead of just trying to like move on to what the next steps would be. But like in terms, I think there's also an important piece here about scholarships. And that's usually when I tell students, like, let's pull up your terms and conditions. Like, can we see what options there are? Is there like, do you have a grace period? Like just starting to think about how they can move forward and then like resources to hopefully help them prevent this happening again.
Really good point, addressing the scholarships too. Sometimes it's divorcing the two too, right? Like they see the domino effect there, and trying to at least step in with that too. I think a big reason why I put AI in this concept too, and getting us thinking a little bit more about it and the ready with solutions, is that there's a lot that probably all of us, we could admit in this room, we don't know about AI yet. And so this is kind of that encouragement of being ready with solutions, is probably thinking about what are some of those new things that we're going to start seeing in these difficult conversations. AI is not going anywhere. I literally just had a student in my office yesterday that is thinking about transferring schools. So we're thinking about majors when he transfers. And so he kept telling me, oh, yeah, this school has this, this has that. And finally, I had to ask, where are you searching these things? And I found out he was using Copilot, and so he searched Texas State University for a co-pilot for the majors, and doesn't have a culinary program. It told him yes, but he never clicked on the actual link. And we found out, because Texas State is a university system, it wasn't the campus he was thinking about. And so, yeah, oftentimes this is where those difficult conversations are going to kind of get interweaved as we start hearing about AI, and also where we might see some avoidance from students also as well, to have some of those conversations, is that they might start moving towards AI as well too. So awesome. I know we're getting close to time here. So I'm actually going to just read this one, have you think about it. I'm not going to put a timer on this one because I want to circle back to your own sticky points that we had. So just another one about Viola Davis, and you had a 30-minute meeting with her to discuss if she wants to stay at the U of A and college together, as Viola had a couple complete withdrawals from the last two terms. You feel you had a good conversation with options, right? You felt good after it, even though it was a difficult conversation. But at the end, she seems upset with the discussion that you had. Saving space for feedback, right? This is that perfect opportunity. Again, I'm going to really promote, especially some of us in the room that feel comfortable with the difficult conversations but haven't engaged in this part, is just asking, hey, Viola, I gave you some really difficult conversation. Can you tell me a little bit more how you want to receive this information in the future? Something of that sort, to kind of place the student back in there, and really getting some feedback for yourself as well is really important in the process. Again, that's a harder one for me to say to practice. Certainly, I need to practice that area as well. But something I wanted you all to encourage you to think about as you're trying to implement some of this, especially some that feel good with the first three parts of compassionate directness, but really are needing that feedback component with the people you're working with. So, on that note, I want you to think about limitations real quick. So, we discussed this. Where might be, now that we've had that conversation for the last 50 minutes, where might there be some scenarios where this framework might not be the best place to use? I'm thinking about that. Because I don't want to say that this is appropriate for all situations. So think about that for a second if you want to put some of it in the chat. I know this is a tough question, but I really want us thinking on it. Great. Just put some, yeah, emotionally escalated, some de-escalation there, mental health issues. Yeah, that was a big one that I'm thinking there. Anything else? I wanted to give a shout out of where this might be a little bit more difficult to practice is when you have more than one person in the advising session. So I did want to give some note to that too, that you might want to practice this one way, but having a parent in the room might impact how you approach this as well. So I want you to think about that too, limitations there. But yeah, that the mental health one is a big one there too. That definitely there are just times that I've had a student, for example, that wasn't eligible, but I was so worried about his mental health, right? It wasn't probably the appropriate place for me to be direct. We needed to kind of discuss some more serious aspects of it there too. Great. These were a couple great examples. I wanted you thinking about these, right, in terms of when you're trying to practice some of this component, that there might be some limitations there. All right. What next? So I want you to circle back to those sticky points that you put into the chat earlier, or maybe you jotted down or just thought in your head. So go back to those points if you need to reread what you wrote, or think back what you put on and then think about the number you also put on the ruler. So now let's talk about that component of getting unstuck. So what's one thing that we discussed here today that might help you in terms of getting unstuck with some of those difficult conversations? So think about one thing. I think you probably have heard from myself that I want to try to implementing feedback more into my approach. And that's something that I want to do a little bit more there. And be self-aware that I'm not always direct. But anyway, I want to give you an example for mine. So think about yours and what's a couple ways that you can even just one if you could take away today that can help you get unstuck. I'll put a timer back on. We're good. Oh, no, I'm already seeing some, so this is great. Directness is compassion. Oh, Teresa, thank you so much for putting that because I think that probably needed to be said earlier on. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That directness is compassionate. I think we just oftentimes think it's not, but it's that avoidance strategy instead. And oftentimes we're placating our uncomfortableness with the situation and not doing that. Really good. That's such a good one. Everyone else was like, nah, I'm not going to write one. Think about what else can you take away today? That's really important. Wait for a couple more there. And that's okay if you haven't figured out what exactly you want to do there too. Any brave souls for one more. Being intentional. That's great. Yeah, intentional, I think oftentimes goes with that directness too, right? So that's a really good one. Owning one's discomfort in these conversations. Absolutely. I think that is such an important part there too, is placing, that's that self-compassion part of there too. Yeah, Mark, really good point, right? Your weak points can be a strength. That's why I didn't want to tell you that ruler was a right or wrong one, right? It's not saying that, it's that awareness there. Being flexible and balancing compassion and directness, absolutely. And that's why I love some of you put in there, right? It's situational for you. And so that's probably a really good nuanced approach to it too. All right, these are really good examples. I know we're close to time, so I really want you thinking about, okay, if you need some further practice in this, where are some areas that you can actually get these? So as I mentioned, I did a LinkedIn training at the very beginning of the summer that's actually available You Access Edge. So we all have access to that as employees. So it took about 30 minutes for me to complete it. Again, I'm going to give that caveat. It's a little bit more business focused, but I still found so much power in watching that. Continued readings. I'm going to real quick put a couple of links for you in the chat right here. So we've got a couple readings here if you want to take any of them. They're very simplistic readings, but they're really helpful. I'm thinking about those with compassionate directness. And then really, I'm going to really harp on the self-compassion, which a lot of you put in the chat here, which I think is really important. Sometimes that area we skip in compassionate directness. Any remaining questions? I could stick around for a couple minutes too, but if there's any remaining questions or thoughts, feel free to put them in the chat. Besides that, this is us wrapping up. Oh, I see some chats there. Oh, perfect. Thank you. And I'm going to wish everyone a happy holidays. Thank you so much for coming today and signed up for the LinkedIn course. Yeah, it's really easy videos too, which is super nice. So you can take them really low key. The guy is very calming. So I enjoyed that aspect of it too.